Hi guys, and welcome to another 7-minute lecture. Should we use nuclear energy? This lecture will attempt to provide a quick snapshot of both sides of the argument. Many parts of the world are slowly starting to accept nuclear energy, but we also see people warning us against it. So let's look at both sides. Since this is a huge debate, we can't get into the entire thing. So I'd like to give you what I think are the two biggest reasons in favor and the two biggest against. The two drivers of the pro-nuclear argument are the environmental benefits on the one hand and cost efficiency on the other. As far as the environmental side is concerned, nuclear energy, believe it or not, is one of the cleanest forms of energy that mankind has today. You can take coal, hydro, solar, whatever. Other than wind energy, nuclear produces far less carbon dioxide than the alternatives. And as sort of international pressure mounts on all of us to reduce our carbon footprint and to cut down on the CO2 emissions into the atmosphere, we will start seeing more nations resorting to nuclear energy because most countries have undertaken a legal commitment to fight global warming and to emit less CO2. It would also mean that the poorer parts of the world would be able to industrialize and become wealthy without contributing to climate change. Because all these global environmental treaties that we see right now, what they say is that all of us need to stop producing fossil fuels because it's bad for the planet. And countries like Brazil, India, China have criticized this for being extremely unfair. Because after all, the major beneficiaries of fossil fuels have been Western nations. And yet, the ones who now suffer when fossil fuels are banned are the poorer nations because they're stuck being poor. And they see this as being extremely unfair. That the West has industrialized for generations using coal, and now that the rest of us want to do the same, they tell us that the world will go underwater if we do what they did and if we become as rich as them. It's essentially the same as climbing up a rope and then burning the rope to make sure that nobody gets up to your height. So using nuclear energy would give the developing world a chance to catch up without adding to climate change, since the CO2 emissions would still be low. They can use nuclear energy instead, right, to develop their economies. So it's a win-win situation for both sides. The second factor, as I was saying earlier, is efficiency, particularly the cost to efficiency ratio. Even though a nuclear power plant is much more expensive to set up, the cost of maintaining one is much lower than any of its fossil fuel competitors, which makes it both affordable and profitable. Let's look at the anti-nuclear side now. The major threat here is, of course, the issue of nuclear waste or a leak, which can often be so radioactive that even a small incident can lead to an international catastrophe. And while we are constantly finding new safeguards and new ways to recycle nuclear energy, there will always be some kind of waste, nuclear waste, that we need to deal with. Nuclear waste can stay radioactive for hundreds of thousands of years. That's right, hundreds of thousands of years. Some even say millions of years. There's no way for us to accurately determine how long it would take for the material to no longer be radioactive. We currently store them in crates, in pools of ice cold water, in caverns under the ground, but none of these can serve as permanent solutions simply because of how long these things remain poisonous. Besides, all these systems require maintenance in some way. If you look at the Fukushima incident, for example, which happened almost exactly 10 years ago, what was the issue there? Japan had been storing the radioactive waste in pools of ice cold water, which is normal procedure because water serves as a good protective layer to block the radiation. So most nuclear waste is kept submerged in freezing cold water. But this water has to be kept cold artificially through pumps and cooling systems because the radioactive waste is so hot. And we obviously need electricity to keep these cooling systems working. When the tsunami hit Japan in 2011, it essentially destroyed the power supply in the nuclear plant. the main generators and all the backup generators, all of them were destroyed, which meant that the water could no longer artificially be kept cold, which meant that the radioactive heat emitting from the waste made the water boil and evaporate, which it in turn meant that the water, which served as a shield between us and the radioactive material, was no longer there, and Fukushima was exposed to all that nuclear waste. So regardless of how many safeguards we have, they can all be snatched away in an instant by a natural disaster. Or we could have a Chernobyl type incident where old-fashioned human incompetence leads to a catastrophe. As I was saying earlier, all you need is one tiny mistake for the entire thing to be a historical calamity. The other major worry is that using nuclear energy might become a pretense under which countries develop nuclear weapons. Look at what's happening in Iran right now, with UN inspectors claiming that Iran isn't cooperating with them. And the United States now says, aha, this is all because Iran wants to use the civilian nuclear program to start siphoning knowledge and resources for a military nuclear program. Iran denies this, of course, and says they simply want to use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. But not many believe this, given statements made by Iranian leaders like Ahmadinejad in the past. And Iran could just be one among a long line of such countries that want to use this trick. This is how India, for instance, became a nuclear power, by diverting nuclear technology given to it by Canada for peaceful purposes and using that to enhance a weapons program. Ultimately, guys, it's up to you to decide where you fall in this debate. Do you feel that the efficiency and the cleanliness of nuclear energy should make it a viable option so that we can all fight climate change while also allowing poorer nations to industrialize? Or do you feel that the security risks are far too high for this to be allowed? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, please don't forget to share and subscribe. Thank you, take care, and I'll see you soon.